North Africa, AD 430. The port city of Hippo Regius is under siege. Inside the walls, a sick old bishop asks for the Psalms to be copied on the plaster so he can read when he's too weak to hold a book. He has spent decades arguing with emperors and heretics, writing about memory and time and motive, and shaping how people think about law and mercy. He will die before the city falls, but the pages survive and keep moving through universities, courtrooms, and protest lines 1600 years later. His name is Augustine. He was born in 354 in Thagest, in what is now Algeria. His father, Patricius, was a pagan city official. His mother, Monica, a determined Christian. Augustine was a standout student and trained in rhetoric, the elite skill for law and public life. As a young man, he took a partner outside legal marriage and had a son, Adeodatus, brilliant, quick-witted, and central to his father's story. Ambition drove Augustine. So did curiosity. He joined intellectual circles, argued with everyone, and tried on big systems in search of answers. He taught rhetoric in North Africa, then in Rome, and finally reached Milan, the Western imperial capital, where a famous bishop named Ambrose could hold a room with line-by-line explanations instead of showmanship. That mattered. Augustine didn't convert on the spot. He stopped sneering and started listening. He read harder philosophy. He read scripture with fresh eyes. And slowly the questions changed from clever puzzles to demands on his life. In his own account of youth, there is a scene that still gets quoted because it is so plain and so honest. He and his friends raid a neighbor's pear tree. They aren't hungry. They steal just to smash the fruit and laugh together. Later, he says the quiet part out loud. He did it because it was wrong. The thrill was the point. That simple confession turns a spotlight on motive. Not every sin is driven by need. Sometimes it is the crooked love of breaking the rule. That hard look at the will, why we do what we hate, became part of his lifelong project. The turning point comes in a garden in Milan. Augustine is torn between the life he wants and the life he knows he should choose. He breaks down and hears a child's sing-song voice from over a wall. Take up and read. He opens a book of Paul's letters and lands on a blunt passage that tells him to put aside the party life and take on a new way. He decides. This is not a hazy legend. He gives the concrete details, the place, the moment, the words that finally moved him. At Easter of 387, Ambrose baptizes Augustine and his son, Adeodatus. On the way home, his mother Monica dies at Ostia. Augustine writes their last conversation as they look out at the river and speak quietly about God. It is brief, unforced, and human. He returns to North Africa planning a life of study and community. The plan changes when the church at Hippo pulls him into public work. He is ordained a priest and then made bishop. From here on, you meet Augustine in letters and sermons, not just in books. He writes to governors and judges. He negotiates peace inside a church split by a fight now known as the Donatist controversy, where some wanted a pure community apart from clergy who had failed under persecution. Augustine argues for unity, restoration, and patience even amid sharp disagreement. In another long fight, against Pelagian ideas, he argues that human effort alone cannot heal a bent will. Grace is not a decoration at the end of moral effort. It comes first. The writing never stops. Around 400 he completes Confessions, a work many still call the first great Western autobiography. It is not a resume, it is an X-ray. He names temptations, ambitions, and failures, and then uses them to ask clear questions. What is memory? What is time? What do I love when I love? Why is my will divided? After the sack of Rome in 410, he begins City of God. People say the empire fell because Christianity made it weak. Augustine's answer is direct. There are two cities in history, two forms of love that intermingle. One built on the love of self to the contempt of God, one on the love of God to the contempt of pride. Empires rise and fall. Do not mistake the survival of an earthly state for the measure of justice. Near the end of his life, he publishes Retractions, a sober review of his own works. He marks where he would tighten an argument or correct a sentence. A public figure editing himself in print is rare then. It is rare now. Here is where his thought steps into the street. You have probably heard the line, "An unjust law is no law at all." Augustine did not license chaos. He drew a line between rules that borrow moral authority by serving justice and rules that contradict it. Centuries later, that distinction walks into an American jail. In April 1963, during the Birmingham campaign, Martin Luther King Jr. is arrested for marching without a permit and held on Good Friday. From that cell, he writes the letter from Birmingham Jail. In it, he cites Augustine's sentence to frame nonviolent civil disobedience. We have a moral duty to obey just laws and a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws, accepting the penalty to awaken the conscience of the community. The letter explains why a permit that blocks basic rights is not a neutral regulation. It ties protest to public reason instead of rage. Augustine's line becomes a tool ordinary people can use to weigh law by justice in plain language. That is not Augustine playing politician. It is Augustine being consistent about ordered love. The point is not that desire is bad or that bodies are bad. He had lived enough to know desire can run the show. The question is whether loves are in order, whether lesser goods try to sit in the highest seat. In personal life, that looks like honesty about motive, discipline, and mercy for others. In public life, it looks like refusing to deify the state and insisting that power sits under judgment. He was no romantic about violence. In letters that later shaped just war limits, he argued that force, if used at all, must be constrained by rightful authority, right intention, and the hard duty to seek peace. You can hear the attempt to fence a brutal world with rules that make it slightly less brutal. If you want a clear timeline, keep these waypoints in mind. He is born in 354 in Thagist. In the 370s and 380s, he studies, teaches rhetoric, moves to Milan, and hears Ambrose. In 387, he decides in that garden, is baptized at Easter, and loses his mother at Ostia. In the 390s, he is ordained in Hippo. Around 400, he finishes Confessions. After 410, he develops City of God. In 426 and 427, he issues Retractions. In 430, he dies as the Vandals close in on Hippo. The cathedral and library are spared. The books keep traveling. There are two more pieces that help newcomers read him without getting lost. First, his style. He writes with scripture in one hand and lived experience in the other. When he asks what time is, he is not writing puzzles for their own sake. He is trying to understand memory, hope, and the way a life stretches between what is past and what is promised. Second, his candor. He tells you about the concubine, the ambition, the theft of pears, the hot shame, the quick wit, and the hunger for applause. He does not stage manage his image. He lets you see the seams. That is part of why people still read him. The voice sounds like a person you could argue with, not a marble bust. Bring the story back to Hippo. Augustine is old. The Psalms are on the walls. Outside, the Vandals are not impressed by fine rhetoric. Inside, the bishop keeps writing letters and praying psalms. He dies, and the siege grinds on. Yet the writing outlives the walls. Monks copy, scholars comment, reformers quote. Judges and activists borrow a line about unjust laws and turn it into a lever that moves real lives on real streets. This is what it looks like when a thinker crosses from a study to a city and stays there. If you want to start reading him without pre-work or footnotes, try this short map. In Confessions, look for the pear theft, the garden decision, and the chapter where he tries to say what time is and honestly admits how strange the question becomes when you try to explain it. In City of God, read the opening books that answer people who blamed Christians for Rome's fall. Watch him separate the fate of an empire from the question of justice. Then read King's letter from Birmingham Jail and notice how a bishop from North Africa gives plain words to a pastor in a cell in Alabama. The line between them is not mystical. It is an argument about law that holds in daylight. Augustine is exciting for reasons that do not depend on niche taste. He helped invent a way of talking about the inner life that modern people still use. He taught generations to test the state by justice instead of headlines. He turned confession into analysis instead of theater. He fought for unity when outrage sold better. He edited himself in public. And he left one sentence that still lets citizens ask whether a rule deserves to be obeyed. That is enough to earn a place on any serious shelf. It is also enough to keep showing up in court opinions and classroom debates whenever someone asks what the law is for. So the picture is not complicated. A restless kid who once stole fruit for the thrill becomes a bishop who measures power by love's order. A court insider who loved applause becomes a pastor who writes for ordinary people. A man who once mocked scripture becomes a writer whose pages help a modern country explain why some laws must be broken to make the whole system more lawful. The city fell. The pages did not. And they still push us to ask better questions about conscience, justice, and the kind of lives we are trying to build.